And I mean, there's times in life where I've prioritized work over family, and sometimes you have to for financial reasons. You've got to work overtime, um, and I think that's fine to do for short periods of time. But eventually, it will catch up to you, and your family is going to realize it too. But I get it. Like
Hmm.
there's times where you need to work an extra shift. You got to provide for your family, but if you do that for too long, if you do that for decades, eventually it does catch up to you. Um, One thing in the last couple years that I've been a lot better at than when I was a paramedic is just doing consistent things daily that um, I don't know how much you listen to Jocko, but he talks about tactical versus strategic
Yeah,
tasks
I'm a
in your
Jocko
life.
fan.
Yeah, I love the guy. And strategic things are the things that you do consistently daily. You don't see an immediate reward from them.
Thank you for tuning in to the Critical Conversations podcast, brought to you by Mind the Frontline. Established in 2023 as a 501c3, Mind the Frontline is your ally in the journey to support those who selflessly safeguard our communities. Their core mission revolves around pioneering innovation and research, education, and overall well-being specifically tailored to healthcare, military, and public service frontline first responders. The Critical Conversation podcast is a dedicated space for police, fire, EMS, allied health workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Here, we dive into the heart of the matter, tackling essential topics such as mental health strategies, recovery methods, treatment options, the latest research, and professional development opportunities. Before we dive into today's episode on Critical Conversations, we do want to, however, acknowledge the nature of our discussions. Some of the content discussed may be triggering or intense as we explore the challenges and the triumphs within the first responder community. We recognize that these discussions may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you or someone you know is struggling and needs immediate support, we urge you to reach out to your agency's mental health resources or your local peer support group. In time of mental health crisis, you can always contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by phone or via text at 988. Please remember you are never alone and help is always available. At Mind the Frontline, we are more than just a podcast. We are a community committed to fostering resilience within the entire first responder family. So whether you're on the front lines or supporting those who are, we invite you to subscribe, engage, and be a part of this vital mission. To learn more, please visit us at www.mindthefrontline.org. Now let's dive into today's critical conversation. Welcome to another episode on Critical Conversations podcast by Mind the Frontlines, the podcast for first responders, mental health advocates, listeners, and the Mind the Frontline community members. In this episode, we're going to be discussing how to thrive in emergency medicine. Our guest speaker for this episode is Aaron Costantino, who has been working in the emergency department for almost 15 years now. He started as an EMT and then became a paramedic, and now he's working as a full-time ER PA. His passion to assist anyone who is serving patients in the emergency medicine and struggling with burnout, frustration, and feeling isolated. Aaron is also the host of the PracticalEMS podcast. We hope to educate the first responder community on how they can thrive in emergency medicine. Now let's get moving and learn how to thrive today. Hey, welcome, Aaron. How are you doing, sir? Thank you so much for making it on the Critical Conversations podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I love your mission, and I've been super excited to be on your show. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude, man. I read a little bit more about your bio, and I mean, you definitely did everything that I was trying to do. You know, I was trying to struggle like, hey, should I go the PA route? Should I go the RN route? So you actually did it. So I'm looking forward to hearing kind of more about tell us about your story, inform our viewers and listeners kind of, your little bit about your background, what got you started and kind of what your passion and mission is now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started college right out of high school, not really knowing what I wanted to do. I had this vague idea that maybe I want to be a doctor, but I didn't really understand how much schooling that was going to require. And so I started college, and the first semester sucked. I had no idea what I was getting into. I was terrible. I didn't want to study. I was working full time at a grocery store. I was like, this is untenable. There's no way I'm going to be a doctor. And I always wanted to do something in medicine. I did kind of have an idea that medicine was the route I wanted to go. And some person, I don't even remember who this person was, said, well, go get your EMT. And I didn't even know what that was at the time. And I was like, well, maybe that's a good idea. I'll just look into that. It's, emergency stuff. You ride on an ambulance. I really had no idea like what that career was, but I went and got it. And that was in 2008. Totally fell in love with emergency medicine at that point. I was hooked. I don't think I even knew what a paramedic was while I was in EMT school. I had no friends that were in EMS, no idea at all. And so I got my EMT in 2008, and then started working for the private ambulance company on the wheelchair side, driving grandma to her medical appointments. Because I think I was under the age that you could even drive an ambulance. So I had to kind of work into that role to be an EMT on the ambulance. And finally, I was old enough that their insurance would cover me to drive the ambulance. And I just had an absolute blast. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, trying to learn from these experienced paramedics and EMTs, and just fell in love with it. And of course, made paramedic my next goal. And I think I got my paramedic in 2011. So I worked as an EMT for about 2 years in a busy 911 system for private ambulance. And then while I was in paramedic school, I kind of knew like PA was the next route for me, but it really seemed like this lofty, impossible goal. I went to like an information session and I was like, there's no way I'm going to be a good enough student to do this eventually. But slowly but surely, while I worked as a paramedic for, I guess, 7 or 8 years full time, I just slowly got my prereqs done, slowly got all the, the requirements in my undergrad degree, and applied. And I was fortunate enough to get in on my first try, which isn't a lot of people's story. But so I got into PA school in 2017, graduated 2019, and did a rotation with the ER that I'm very used to working with as a paramedic. And I loved the group. The group was amazing. They're very used to training up new grads. I was obviously used to the system and the EMS crews, which was huge. And so I started in the very beginning of 2020, which, as you'll probably remember, is about 2 months shy of when the pandemic kicked off. And I was like, oh my gosh, did I make a huge mistake by progressing in medicine?
That was a good time to come into the medicine field.
Right. I mean, just terrible. I mean, like, volumes plummeted for one reason, which is bad for the hospitals in some ways. And then they rose significantly as everybody was coming in with COVID, and the way we practiced emergency medicine in the ER had to really change because the volumes were untenable. We couldn't see these patients fast enough. And then the ones that were sick with COVID were really sick with COVID and they were dying. So it was a pretty intense trial by fire when I started, and did kind of make me think like, gosh, I don't know that medicine is something I'm going to be able to do if this is what it's going to look like from here on out. And I mean, just like the crews dealt with, having to wear these insane gowns on every call and reusing PPE. I mean, it added a whole new stress to emergency medicine in general that is just, I think everyone's still recovering from it, right? I mean, it was just a bad time and a stressful time. And you're, never like before in medicine had I been like afraid of the disease my patient has that we're treating them for. But with COVID, you're like, I might catch this. I might get really sick from this. I might miss work. I might die from this. I might bring it home to my family. And so you actually, like you would live in fear a lot of times of the disease that your patient had. So, I mean, that just added all kinds of new elements to it.
That sounds like some insurmountable stress, where you came into, PA, in early 2020. I was getting out of aeromedical actually and focusing more on the company I owned at the time. And so, but I saw the struggles that a lot of my coworkers and former partners were going through, like you mentioned, just, wearing these gowns, the extra steps it took to decon and transport these patients that were super, super sick, doing prone positioning, ventilation. And, it really took a toll on their mental health. I can absolutely attest to that. And I do think we're still recovering from that. And I think we're recovering slowly. We're not rebounding like I think we have with other kind of endemics or pandemics. This one really, I think, is the straw that broke the camel's back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a field that has high levels of burnout at baseline, and then you add something like that. I mean, it burned a lot of people out. A lot of people left medicine. A lot of people left EMS. And yeah, we're still recovering from it. It's not something you can just bounce back from, I think. But even still, even working in the ER, I still have such a huge passion for emergency medicine and really now that I've been able to get my head above water, I mean, when I was an EMT, I was focused on getting my paramedic. When I was a paramedic, I was focused on getting my PA. And then, of course, as a new PA, the learning curve is still very steep, regardless of what you did before. And now that I've been doing it for 4 years full time, I finally feel like my head's above water, and I'm kind of looking for, well, what's next? There's not really, I'm not going to go to medical school. Everybody asks PAs, well, are you done with school? Like, yeah, being a PA is kind of, that's it. Usually we don't progress to medical school. It's not like you kind of start all over. So it is kind of you're done when you're a PA. And so I'm like, well, what's next? And I really found this desire and passion to help who I was 5-10 years ago, help the paramedics and EMTs that I interact with on a daily basis, and help the ER staff too. I always say emergency medicine just because it encompasses, EMS and the ER. And my desire is to help heal the healers. Everybody deals with so much mental stress. And honestly, our patient volume is so high, I just don't have time to sit down with the crews and give them the feedback I want to give them, or talk about the rough case they had like I would like to. We can have these little moments here and there, but then I got to run off and be putting in orders and seeing the next patient. And so that's kind of the reason why I started what I'm doing with the podcast, is to be able to have those conversations in an unrushed, unhurried manner, to give the crews feedback, encourage them, tell them the things I wish I knew when I was a paramedic, kind of from my perspective now as an ERPA. I've struggled with burnout quite a bit, in the last 15 years periodically. I don't know that I've ever had super prolonged periods of it, but you have those weeks of shifts that really catch up to you. And one kind of dramatic shift I remember, I was working a 48-hour shift on the private ambulance, but we were kind of housed with the fire department. And so the goal is, in that 48-hour shift, you're not running calls, hopefully, that whole time. You're supposed to get, a decent amount of sleep, but I'm sure and most of your audience knows that does not materialize a lot of the time, and you get run ragged. And it was one of those shifts where we're like, man, we are not getting any sleep. We're on night number 2, running on like 2 hours of crappy sleep, and just getting run into the ground. And it's like 2 a.m. We're getting off in 6 hours. We're not sleeping. And it was in a more rural community, so our transport times and our scene times were very, very long. So we get paged out to a call. We groan and roll our eyes and roll out of bed and, pull on our boots and start walking down to the ambulance. And, we look at the pager, and the way our pager system worked was, you'd usually get like an unknown medical. They're still getting all the call information from the caller. But when it's a critical patient, a lot of times that process happens very quickly. And this was a cardiac arrest. And so, we look down as we're walking, we see it's a cardiac arrest, and we see the age is a pediatric. And we're like, well, shit, that's what you say when you get that call is, let's, we're going to drive a little faster to this one. We're going to drive probably unsafe speed and not exactly follow policy to this call, which doesn't always happen. Usually it's abdominal pain or whatever. They've got some time, but when it's a pediatric cardiac arrest and seconds matter, we kind of hauled ass. Despite that, the call was still, I think it took a half hour to get on scene. It was just out in the middle of nowhere. And the BLS fire crew was doing a great job going down the ACLS algorithm. And we still were intubating pediatrics at that time. So I tubed the kid, dosed, epi. I had it all written down on my glove. And, this kid was like 5 or 6. And, we didn't get him back. And, despite all of our best efforts, like, I'm taking a turn doing CPR. The flight crew arrives because we're going to try to fly this kid. And I think we ended up flying him despite the fact that we didn't get Ross, just because I just didn't have it in my heart to pronounce this kid. And, of course, the kid didn't make it. He'd been down for far too long without any ALS treatment. And we drive back to the station. You clean up your ambulance. The ambulance is a disaster. All your bags and equipment are a disaster. And trying to go back to sleep at like 4 a.m. after running that kind of a call. And there's nothing really unique about that call. We all have dealt with similar situations. And that's the hard part about emergency medicine, is that's something that we see fairly typically. Maybe not every shift, maybe not every week, maybe not every month, but we all run a call like that where it's just, you're not supposed to see that shit. You know what I mean? Like, a normal human being walking around in the world would never have to bear the burden of seeing a child die and not be able to do anything about it. And so that's, I think, what's so key in EMS and in emergency medicine is you have to be intentional about your own mental health and how you recover from that kind of stuff. And the last couple of years, as I've, kind of established myself as an ERPA, I'm not, just treading water anymore. It's how can I help people with the crazy shit that we see so often, just like that. And everybody's got stories like that. That call's not particularly unique, and that's what kind of tears me up a little bit. Is I hear the stories from the crews. They're running these calls all the time, and you've got to have some ways of coping with it, in order to thrive in emergency medicine. So
I like how you kind of put that. Like, there's other people out there that have similar conversations, but honestly, we're just not talking about them sometimes, right? And we're compartmentalizing that and kind of pushing it deep down. But also, like you also mentioned, like it's not, when people are like, "Hey, you kind of signed up for this," especially like the general public, as I like to call them, the ignorance is not bliss sometimes. But hey, you get paid to see stuff like that, right? No, I get paid to do a job that's fulfilling. I'm still human. I still absorb calls like that, like any human would. And at least on the early on in my career, I could remember some of those critical calls, and they seem to stick with me a lot longer, and some still do, than some of the ones down in the career, because I hadn't had that resiliency or that fortitude kind of built in, as I got into the career. Because there was nothing in paramedic school, there's nothing in EMT school, there's nothing in my advanced EMT class that really prepared me for what I was going to walk into. It was kind of just like, you either figure out how to sink or swim. And that really kind of is the analogy I would put, because some people do sink and they sink quickly, and some people are able to swim and they tread water for a while. And then guess what? They get tired. And then guess what? They drown. And then there's some people that I'll never understand for the life of me, but more than likely it's probably because they had some really good coping skills before they got into this industry or this business, and they go on for 20 to 30 years. Not to say that it doesn't affect them, but they're able to, cope with that a little bit better, or they had those coping skills when they got in. So they were able to unpack their backpack along the way, and okay, I can take a break, or, sit on a PFD or a life jacket, so to speak, and take a break for a minute. Whereas other people are, they're just swimming nonstop, like in the worst marathon of their career, until they just give up. And that's what's I wish, and that's why we do podcasts like this. It's to have these conversations, to let other people know, like, hey, we get it. Like, we've been there. Like, we're not having these conversations. And I absolutely think we need to be having more of these conversations so other people can know what it feels like to either be burned out, like you mentioned, or under a lot of stress. Because sometimes they at least in my experience, when I have people reach out to me, whether it be through social or our peer support hotline, really it's just like, I feel like this, is that normal? Like, they actually question, like, does feeling empathy and sadness, and like, is that normal? Like, because everybody else is like saying, I need to, like, macho chismo it up and not feel this, and so it sucks. But I think having these conversations are important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, it's the stigma in EMS that, we just got to let all this stuff roll off our backs and it doesn't affect you. And I remember when I was a new EMT trying to, like, have that attitude, like, oh, this stuff doesn't affect me. Like, yeah, we're running cardiac arrest and seeing just horrible tragedy, and you just, like, kind of shake it off. But it ends up kind of biting you in the ass later on. And sometimes in kind of, insidious ways that you would never realize. Maybe you do feel okay after you get off shift, but are you really okay long term? That stuff does eat at you over time. And I remember one time when I was a brand new EMT, we left base, we get called for a cardiac arrest, typical morning, right? Especially when you work an early shift. The first couple calls, a lot of times, are people waking up to their dead relatives. And so we go to this cardiac arrest, and we've got a brand new EMT student in the back of the rig. And she's excited, she's gung-ho, she's asking lots of questions, very eager. And we go in, past this guy's kids and past his wife, and, he's been in cardiac arrest for a while, and he's rigored. I'm a brand new EMT, so I start compressions anyway. And my paramedic partner's like, hey, we don't need to attempt resuscitation in this case. And we go back, we put our rig back together, and the EMT students kind of just sitting there quiet. And, brand new EMT Aaron's like, hey, this is what we do. This is every day we see dead bodies, and you just got to get used to it. We're probably going to see some more today, and not a big deal. And my partner's like, hey, Aaron, like, stop talking like that. She's back there crying. And I was like, oh gosh. And then I realized, like, we tend to dehumanize people in this job and write this stuff off. And this brand new EMT student kind of had to remind me, like, there's a human side to this, and it's not abnormal to be tearful about something that is tragic in real life, and that doesn't mean you're not cut out for this job. It just means that, you need to have intentionality with your coping strategies and make sure that you're talking to people and that you're, developing healthy habits and not bad ones. And, but I think everybody can kind of relate to that,
No, and that's the thing. Like, we don't realize that because we've been indoctrinated that way, and we just model the behavior that was put before us, right? Like, I can only emulate the behavior of my senior firefighters or some of the medics as I was an EMT, or some of my instructors even, and that typically was the mindset. And that sucks because I wish I didn't have that mindset. Looking back on my career, I've had some of those very instances where it's like, hey, we get a third rider on the helicopter, or and I'm on the, we drop off like a gnarly code, or we've done some things. Like, I remember one we did a finger thoracotomy on. I ended up criking the guy. It was pretty much a complete traumatic arrest, except we actually got Ross for a quick second until we took off, and literally like 6 seconds, 6 minutes later into the flight, like, we started losing pulses again, and we never got that lady back. But we had a third rider on that one. And this was just like I believe it was an EMT or an EMT. It might have been a paramedic student, actually, now that I think about it. But, I'm sitting here just doing my thing, and we're used to it. Like, we just go to work, right? And I'm focused on the patient and doing what I need and trying to, do all the interventions. And I remember we landed over at Flagstaff Medical Center and dropped off this lady. And, I go back up to the helipad. And as we're kind of walking out there, like, we're casually like, hey, let's go grab some lunch, and this person was almost just catatonic because they went from like an EMT, and they, probably had seen a couple of things, or I can't remember. Sometimes, I hear stories of people going to EMT school and then they go right into paramedic school. And so they've actually not been exposed other than maybe their 10 to 12 hours at the ER, or whatever that EMT requirement is. And really, I don't think that conveys enough of what you're going to run into.
Totally.
But I remember this student just being like, and come to find out later, like, I don't know if they actually finished the paramedic program. I think that was when they finally learned like what they might be exposed to. And that was heavy for them. And I didn't have the grace at the time. And, this is where I wish I could have done better. I wish my mentors would have taught me better, but they really just kind of walked into that, and it was kind of like, hey, let's grab lunch, and like just brush it back off. Like, hey man, I hope we get another code. That was fun, and this person is literally for the first time experiencing this, and it's a big thing for them. Like, for me, it's like, okay, this is probably like my 1200th flight at this point. For them, it was their very first call. And that would be the call that'll probably stick with them for the rest of their life, whether they stayed in EMS or not. And I just didn't do a good job in just kind of setting that up. So I'm a lot more mindful. And that's why I liked how you talk about it, because there's probably people out there that listen to this, right? So if you guys got a ride along or a student or someone like that, be mindful after the first call, because they may have never seen that type of trauma or that type of emotional, traumatic kind of injury kind of so to themselves. And so being kind of graceful and kind of like pulling them aside and be like, hey, I want to help you process this now. Like, that was heavy for your first time. I wish I had tools like that back in the day, but I do now. So I'm thankful for it. What would you say?
Yeah. I mean, that could be the critical time where they decide this is not for me, or I can deal with this and maybe this is for me. I mean, and that's the danger with the 0 to hero thing, right? Going EMT right to paramedic is you do lack that field experience. And so when you haven't had field experience and you go through all that schooling, you go through EMT and then you go straight through paramedic, that's a lot of work to find out that the job's not for you. And I do think that that's truly the case a lot of times. Sometimes this job really isn't for you, but at the same time, you just need to learn how to process some of this stuff too, because a lot of people it's a skill to develop to be able to deal with the hard stuff that we see. And if you can develop that skill, you can thrive in emergency medicine. If you fail to establish that skill or give up after seeing the first traumatic cardiac arrest, you would never know what your potential is. But a lot of times, I think it is so important, though, for people that are precepting and dealing with these new students, like when they see something traumatic for the first time, that's a critical moment for you to step in and say, hey, this is not something we usually see every day. This is something you've got to learn to deal with. You need to use this time now to develop the healthy strategies to survive in this field. Or they can use that time to decide that, I can't deal with this and I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to develop the skills that I need to see this again. And that can be crucial, for sure.
Yeah, I think I would put it on some of these FTOs or just some of the first responders that when they have a student is, that's a good time. That's a good learning moment, right? That's a good teaching moment. We can teach these individuals on some of these coping mechanisms and how they can manage, like you said, hey, this isn't regular, but when you do have something like this happen, like here are some tools in your toolbox that you should absolutely consider to make yourself successful and have a long career in EMS or emergency medicine or, as a law enforcement officer. But what are some good mindful approaches to stress management, right? So we just saw this stressful event. It's very stressful. Whether I'm a student or I've been doing this for 15, 10 years, how can I kind of bring some of these mindful kind of techniques into my stress management and being able to kind of make sure I'm taking care of myself?
Yeah, that's a huge topic and something I think needs to be talked about a lot more. I kind of have these standards. I call them emergent standards. I call them emergent standards because if you don't set standards that you can seek to meet every day in emergency medicine, eventually they're going to catch up with you and they're going to be an emergency, right? If you fail to exercise every day, eventually that's going to catch up to you and it's going to be an emergent problem if you're not doing consistent daily work. And one kind of standard that I have for myself is to walk slowly through the ER. And it sounds really simple on the surface, but you see these providers that speed walk from room to room. They're wringing their hands, they're stressed out, they're sweating, and most of our patients are not dying. And if you've got a critical patient that's dying in a room, sure, go run to their room. But most of the time, that's not the case. And so one of these standards that I set for myself is to actually walk from room to room. Don't speed walk, don't run, don't look anxious. Like, just purposefully have this calm demeanor. Take a couple deep breaths as I prepare to see the next patient so that I can get myself in the right mindset and actually be mindful of what I'm doing. And I think it has this kind of calming presence on the rest of the staff. One thing I talk about a lot is that, especially as a provider in the ER or a paramedic on a scene, you are in a leadership role and people look to you and they look to see what your affect is, and they end up modeling that behavior, negative or positive. And so I try to make this conscious effort to say, no matter how busy it is, no matter how far behind I am, I'm going to actually walk slowly to the next room. I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. I'm going to think about this next patient as a human and how can I make them feel fully understood. Obviously our number one goal is to provide great evidence-based medicine, but truthfully, the patients just don't really care about that. They want to feel that you are actually listening to them. They want to feel understood. They want to feel cared for. And when you're rushing from room to room and you're speed walking and you're sweating and you're not sitting down next to the bedside, you're standing, with your arms crossed at the foot of the bed, the patient doesn't feel cared for. And after you've been doing this long enough, I feel like you start to realize that in order to avoid burnout, you actually need to make the patients feel cared for, and that actually makes you feel better about the care that you provide. So I try to tell everyone, like, obviously there's situations where you need to run or you need to speed walk, but most scenes, most patients in the department, you don't need to be running from room to room. So the bigger concept here is slow down, take a deep breath, have some mindfulness, realize that most of our patients are not actively dying. You need to go in with a clear mind, try to put your bias aside so you can get the story from them in a clear, concise method and figure out what you need to do. And I just think that that's one of the standards that people need to realize is just establishing this mindfulness and walk slowly from room to room, because when you handle things with some poise and some calmness, you provide a lot better leadership for the rest of the department or the rest of the scene. That's such a key thing about being a paramedic, right? Is being that calming presence. You don't have to know what to do, on every call. And a lot of times we don't. You walk into absolute chaos. You're trying to get a story. Drunk people are yelling at you, but you need to be above the fray. You need to be a little detached. You need to be kind of above it all in order to get an accurate story about what's going on and come up with a plan. And I think that walking slowly from room to room, the foundation behind that is you need to be detached. If you're getting caught up in the chaos, if you're getting caught up in the stress.
Cool thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to kind of add on to what you were just saying, because I like that, walking with purpose. As we're walking with purpose, technically you are doing a little bit of what we call BLS, or bilateral stimulation. And then, you kind of threw that in like, hey, I'm going to take some breaths, I'm going to move. And then I would even throw in, take a swallow, all of that stuff kind of resets your autonomic, nervous system. And, that's walking with purpose out to the ambulance. Like I used to run out to the ambulance because I wanted to beat the fire, the fire crew. So that way, because I was a booter and I needed to lead the ambulance. I had to pull up the map books because we didn't have the fancy CADs that everybody's got nowadays. So we were the old fashioned, like, hey, where's the address? What box is it in? What section? And then try to plot your way there, and that's stressful at like 3 o'clock in the morning when you're new and the captain in the engine's like, come on, man, get going, bro. But I like how you put like walking with purpose. Emergency medical professionals face high stress environments all the time. It's unpredictability, the trauma exposure, the time sensitive decision making at certain times. Like you mentioned, bringing that calm to the storm. I may not be able to get through the storm or weather the storm, but as long as I bring my calmness into it and don't add to it, like that was one of the things that I think I tried to emphasize as a flight paramedic, because sometimes I would teach those newer medics or those newer EMTs or firefighters or whoever was watching, hey, how to maintain your composure. Because if you're able to do that, you actually find yourself kind of getting through some sticky situations. And I may not know it all, but sometimes it's just, that's where you just, the imposter syndrome sets in. And sometimes you need that. You need to have a little bit of an imposter syndrome so you have the courage yourself to maintain that calm and continue to calm others and just kind of get the job done. But I do know that like studies have shown that like mindfulness practices such as like meditation, deep breathing exercises, body scans can help mitigate some of the symptoms of anxiety and depression and burnout, and giving us that kind of emotional regulation and cognitive flexibility. What are there any other things, like other than like outside of work and kind of walking slowly with purpose, like that you practice as far as mindful techniques?
Yeah, I think that you bring up a great point about, give me a sec to collect my thoughts here. Yeah, so things outside of work that I think are super important are to establish some daily routines that you just do regardless of how you feel. The boundary between work and home life is extremely important to me. And one of the benefits of emergency medicine, especially on the provider side in the ER, is you don't have to take charting home with you. You don't have to take a lot of work home with you. You're not calling patients after the fact. You're not doing charting when you go home. When you leave the hospital building, you can actually leave it behind. And I always tell, especially our new PAs, like you need to focus on leaving work on time. And obviously there's certain aspects to that are beyond your control. If, you're caught up in something and you need to be there, you need to be there and you're going to be late, right? And on the ambulance, there's, that piece is even more outside of your control. I mean, so many times I was headed back to base and we would get a late call, and that puts you off an hour, 2 hours late sometimes. But there's a lot of aspects of this you can actually control too. Staying up on your charting throughout the day, writing your reports as quickly as you can after the call so that you're not stacking them at the end of your shift. You should never rely on that period of time at the end of your shift to write all your reports. Getting off on your predetermined time is super key to actually leaving work at work and not having it overflow into your life. And I really think that locus of control aspect really prevents burnout. The more things that you can have under your control, the less burned out you're going to be, the more in control of your life you're going to feel. And so as much as you can control it, I say just really get off on time. And mentally get off on time as well. Don't be dwelling on calls at, your entire way home. Sometimes I'll set up some boundaries around this. If I have a patient that really bothered me or a traumatic patient that came in the ER, I'll let myself think on it and dwell on it my whole drive home. But as soon as I pull into my neighborhood, it's gone. I have to stop dwelling on it. I have to stop thinking through the entire case over and over again. What could I have done better? What could we have changed about this situation? Like, why is life this unfair? And I just drop it. Because I think you have to refocus on your family, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your kids. They need you to be there mentally, and you can't be there mentally if you're having this circular thinking and you're dwelling about your job. So part of getting off on time is just leaving the hospital at the hospital, leaving the ambulance at base. You don't want to be bringing this stuff home with you, because it's just going to lead to burnout, and it's going to interrupt your time when you should be thinking about happier things and dwelling on happier things and being there, clearly mentally for your family. A big part of this in the ER, I tell the new PAs, is just to start planning how you're getting out of there 2 hours before the end of your shift. So a lot of times you've got multiple patients in various stages of workup. You need to be thinking about which of these am I going to wrap up and which of these do I need to hand on to the next provider. And you need to be preparing for that 2 hours before your shift ends, not 5 minutes before your shift ends, because all that stuff takes time. You need to go tell the patient, hey, I'm passing on your care to the next provider. Like, it requires a lot of intentionality, but it's so important to get off on time, or you can end up staying for an hour, 2 hours late every shift. And that's going to lead to burnout, eventually. So,
and then you kind of start.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, but then you start kind of prioritizing work over your family and what actually is filling your cup and helping you like reduce that burnout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's times in life where I've prioritized work over family, and sometimes you have to for financial reasons. You've got to work overtime. And I think that's fine to do for short periods of time, but eventually it will catch up to you, and your family's going to realize it too. But I get it. Like, there's times where you need to work an extra shift. You got to provide for your family. But if you do that for too long, if you do that for decades, eventually it does catch up to you. One thing in the last couple years that I've been a lot better at than when I was a paramedic is just doing consistent things daily that, I don't know how much you listen to Jocko, but he talks about tactical versus strategic tasks.
Yeah, I'm a Jocko fan.
Yeah, I love the guy. And strategic things are the things that you do consistently daily. You don't see an immediate reward from them, but 5-10 years, down the road, you see huge benefit from these consistent, disciplined daily activities. And tactical stuff, that's the stuff you've got to do every day. You've got to go to work. You've got to answer the email. Someone's calling you. Your kids need something. That's stuff that's going to come up that you have to deal with. But if you do the strategic things first, you get in your exercise, get in some meditation, read some nonfiction, whatever you need to do to put yourself as the number one priority in the day. It's going to be to your long-term benefit. And I think that's one of the huge keys to avoiding burnout is putting yourself first in the morning. And that's another standard that I have is take care of yourself before you take care of patients, and take care of yourself before you take care of your family. It's one of the reasons I have become a huge believer in getting up early before my kids get up, so that I can do a lot of these things. And by the time they're up, I've gotten all this strategic stuff done, so I can now focus on my family without these interruptions. And I think it's key before your shift. I mean, even if you're working 12s, this becomes harder. It's easier, if you're working a 10-hour shift, but you've got to get up early and take some time for yourself. And that means exercise. That means hydrating. That means eating proper nutrition and meditating and, doing things that are going to benefit you in the long term, especially when you work in emergency medicine. We just have to be so intentional with this stuff. And I sucked at this when I was a paramedic. I mean, I was focused on school and work. I didn't have kids at the time, so it was easy to be a workaholic. I would work way too many hours, always signed up for that overtime shift. And I just think that it does catch up to you. And, it led to me being out of shape and way overweight and, mentally foggy while on shift. And that stuff just slowly catches up to you if you are not intentional about doing them daily.
I can relate to that, Aaron. And it's one of those things I tell a lot of people now because once again, I wish I would have known some of these things back then and I didn't. And so I was that guy that, at one point in my career, I was working for a fire department full time. I was flying full time and working part time at another fire department. And some of it was because I needed money to just to make, we didn't want to take out a huge amount of school debt while my wife was going through her perfusion program in Tucson. But a lot of it was, I didn't realize at the time, it was just me coping. I didn't want to deal with the silence. And so if I was constantly going, that was one of my bad coping techniques. And I like how you said, how you put that, like every now and then it's okay. But if it's a habit or it becomes consistent, I will tell you folks, like eventually you do pay the piper on that and it doesn't have a good return on investment. If you do need another job, or like part-time work, try finding something that isn't evolved around, and I get that because overtime is still overtime, is going to pay more. But if you need it, maybe take a second job doing something else that is not something that is part of your primary profession, so it doesn't weigh down your backpack. But I also liked how you mentioned like self-care, making that a priority every morning. That's what I do. I wake up about anywhere between 4:30 and 5:30, like natural circadian rhythm. Don't need to set an alarm. I'm just like this morning. I woke up at I think 4:50, and I was up. I picked up my daily read. I did my daily read first. I did my meditation, did my thankfulness, my gratitude. Came into the gym, got a good cardio workout in, sweated it out in the sauna, got my, all of that before my kids got up. And I went home and got my kids ready because my
Yeah.
wife's out of town right now. And so, hey, my kids, and I'm already going, like I'm taking care of me. And that
Mhm.
charges actually my whole day. I'm keeping myself healthy. I'm trying to hydrate. Like, so all those things that you mentioned. But when we talk about like self-care practices, it does help us. It does help us navigate, and having a consistent routine or a habit, whether you do it every afternoon or every evening after, after dinner time, or preferably probably in the morning. At least some of the studies have shown, like if you are able to do some of your self-care in the morning, you're more apt to do it because we know life will get in the way. But hey, you're taking some care of that strategic stuff. So whatever comes tactically at you, like you can respond to knowing that I've already set myself up for long-term success, right? Whether that's weight loss, whether that's getting in a good middle space. And for me, mental health and wellness and physical fitness and diet and, sleep are all four, like they are key components is what I would call them. But then so you look at self-care for emergency medical professionals, and in order to sustain your well-being, your effectiveness in this demanding work environment, you have to be doing some form of self-care. It could be prioritizing and making sure that you're getting that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. I know for a long time, there was a couple of years where maybe my average sleep a night was like 6 hours, and I look back now, like
Mhm.
if I'm not sleeping well, my day is usually a little bit off. And so like, it's once again, going back to the basics. So I maintain a healthy boundary between myself, work, and my personal life, and I try to make myself a priority, because if I make me a priority, my personal life and my work life, they just they follow suit. Right.
Yeah, and that might be the most important thing in emergency medicine to stress to people is you've got to put yourself first in the morning. I mean, you are going to serve your patients so much better and you are going to be so much kinder to your coworkers if you've put yourself first in the morning. And I mean, so many of the things you do are just so underappreciated in our society today. People are just go, 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 and they're spending all this time on the things that are just coming up as emergencies. And you've got to spend time on daily, consistent, disciplined activities or it's going to fall by the wayside. And I think it's such a slow fade when you don't do those things. You don't even realize how terrible you're feeling until all of a sudden you have a crisis. And it's all about avoiding a crisis, right? I mean, the more you put the time into this stuff, it's Stephen Covey's sharpening the saw, right? It's doing these
Mm-hmm.
things before they become a huge problem, and eventually they're going to become a big problem if you don't address them every day. And that's kind of why I call these standards emergent standards. If you don't address them now, they're going to be an emergency later. So get on top of it, be proactive. And yeah, it's so underappreciated in our society today, but get up early and just get a few of these tasks knocked out every single day. It'll change your life. It's changed my life. The last couple of years I've done what you're talking about, and it's hard to describe to people that aren't doing it how much of a
They don't get it.
life-changing. No, they don't. And it's so key to progressing and to being the best provider that you can possibly be.
my
'Cause you were
stress and
saying,
my anxiety, I feel content. Like, I mean, I feel like my cup is full, and I really, you just
Mhm.
can't convey that to someone who doesn't understand it, that doesn't practice it. But really, like you said, like, if you're not doing this, folks, I'm going to steal this from my boy Dylan, but it's like doing, watching a slow walk to sad music, because that's exactly what's happening.
yeah. Yeah, you just have to be intentional. I mean, in any career, you have to be intentional about this stuff, but it's so much more important when you're seeing the things that we see every day and you have to build coping strategies. I mean, we all have the coworkers, we've seen the friends that develop the bad coping strategies, right? That aren't doing these things, but instead they're going home and having a drink at night. And that drink turns into 2, turns into 5, turns into 10, turns into drinking every night after shift. And it's
Yeah, that
tragic.
was
And
me.
yeah, and I know a little bit about your story, Chris, and I know people with similar stories. And the alcohol is great; it makes you feel wonderful after a stressful shift. But the the opposite side of that, when it goes to excess, is just horrible depression and horrible sleep, and it just escalates. And I've had coworkers that have allowed this to become such a vice that they've died from it. And part of my motivation and the talks that I do and the podcast episodes I produce is to, if I can just change one person's mind from I'm going to go have a couple drinks because I had a stressful shift to I'm going to go for a run instead, or I'm going to wake up early tomorrow and I'm going to meditate for a half hour to try to get past this. If I can make one person change their behavior in that way, and it's so hard, you can't make anyone change their behavior, right? It's got to be on them. But if I can at least model that behavior for just one person, then it's totally worth it. It's worth making tons of podcast episodes, and it's worth everything for just one person, right? That was in your situation or my coworker's situation. Because I hate to see people be self-destructive like that.
That's why we do it. We didn't realize it. I didn't realize it when I was in the fog. I had no idea, that I was using bad coping skills to damage and the messes I was leaving behind, mainly in my personal life, because I would never drink on the job. I never drink around the job. It was mainly, hey, when I got home, how do I deal with the job? Well, I drank, and I
Mm-hmm.
brought all those bad coping mechanisms to my family and my environment at home, which made that not a safe environment. So then you isolate even more and just, hey, I just want to work more because I know if I work, I'm not going to pick up a drink, at least for now. It becomes this like struggle with a really severe emotional hangover that just kind of led to some really dark days. And that's where, honestly, like I've been doing these practices that we just talked about, Aaron, for like the last 2 years. I've been pretty consistent with it every freaking morning that I can do it, even on the weekends, because I don't want to break my routine, and the benefits, the long-term strategic goal that I got out of getting sober, almost 2 years ago to where I am now, like, once again, you don't see those gains overnight, but I feel them now. Being almost a year, past a year and a half on it, it feels amazing to have this kind of mental state and feeling the way that I do. So I would absolutely encourage people to pick up a routine and start something. Another good book would be Habit Stacking. If you haven't read that, I talk about it all the time. But learn how to habit stack so you can make some of this a little bit easier on yourself. But also, Aaron, I wanted to talk about just a little bit about the team dynamics, because you just mentioned this. Like, we have our peers, our other people that are struggling, and oftentimes, like in the emergency department, like you have a team. Just like at the fire department, EMS. If you're working on a shift as a law enforcement, corrections, like we have teams. How do the team dynamics in support systems kind of play or come into play when we talk about stress management techniques?
Yeah, I think that the development of these career support programs, the peer support programs have been amazing the last few years. We've got a really robust one where I work. And I recommend everybody go through this training because it's so helpful to be able to understand how to talk to your coworkers and help them debrief after something. Because sometimes we do some formal debriefs after a bad case and we kind of come together, talk about what went well, talk about what didn't go well. But no one really has the freedom to express themselves in those group settings. And so I think that these peer support programs, where if you can identify somebody knows how to listen to you and you can go just confide in them for a couple of minutes, is super helpful. Because sometimes that's all people need after a traumatic case is like, hey, can we just talk about this for 5 minutes? And if you can spare that to talk to a coworker or a colleague or whoever it is for just a couple minutes, sometimes that's all people need to move on past it. And I think that leadership in these team settings, especially when you get, in a level 1 trauma center like I work in, you have a ton of resources, and it matters who's leading kind of the case. The paramedics bring in a patient, and if you've got a doc that's not really leading, and you're working this patient or you're working the cardiac arrest and things are not going very well, things aren't happening quickly enough, you feel like there should be more you should have done in that case, it really makes people kind of walk away from the situation feeling defeated, like, that did not go smooth. I don't feel like we did everything. Whereas if you have a good leader that's saying, asking people for their opinions and going down the algorithm, hitting all the points, saying, hey, does anybody have any other thoughts? Are we missing anything here? They're including the EMS crew even in the situation and letting them stay in the room and say, hey, what have you guys tried? Could we try this medication? Then you feel like you actually did everything for the patient, regardless of the outcome. And I think that's such a huge component to a good team, is having a good leader. And that doesn't mean they have to boss everybody around and they have to just stand there, but they should be a little bit detached. They should be making sure everyone's involved and making sure we're doing everything we can so that people can walk away from the situation really feeling like we did everything that we could. I think even just seeing your family as a team is important, realizing that you can talk about these things with your family and you're not going to go into gruesome detail with them, but you can still talk to them and kind of help process, the horrible stuff that you see. Because for me, I don't even need to go into great detail. I just want to talk to my spouse and say, hey, this was a rough day because of A, B, and C. And, it just kind of sucked. And they just vent to them a little bit without going into horrible detail. Just to allow you to process through it. And I think you need that person to talk to. It doesn't have to be your spouse. It can be a coworker, a mentor. It can be anybody, but you should be talking about this stuff to help process it.
And that was kind of my main idea behind creating like our Mind Shield 24/7, peer support kind of debrief hotline is what we call it, is because not everybody has like a good system at their facility or their agency, like you, but like you just mentioned, sometimes we just need to have a quick 5-minute chat, and to move on. So I'm not like holding on to this for the rest of my shift or as I'm going on the next call, or more importantly, like as I'm going home. And, we've had people reach out, it's just like, hey, I just needed to talk, I just need to get this off my chest. They may not have the resource internally. So if you guys are finding yourself in that place, definitely reach out to our peer support team at 866 Mind 24/7. All we are here to do is basically just listen and support you. And I like how you kind of put like everybody should be going through some sort of initial peer support training, or at least the basics of how to communicate with my coworker following, a tough call, a stressful shift, whatever that looks like, because just opening up that communication creates what we call like deep connection. And we know that deep connection, A, is really good for our psyche, but B, allows us to heal. And if we can heal in some of these moments, like, A, hopefully it doesn't turn into PTSS, which then stops it from even hopefully occurring into PTSD. And this is why we need to break these stigmas and really kind of ask for help or talk, or, hey, if you're going home and like you mentioned, hey, I'm driving home and I'm basically, when I hit my neighborhood, I want to shut it down. But if I'm not able to shut it down, then what? And so hopefully there's other ways that you guys can reach out there and, phone a friend, talk to your spouse when you get home, check in with them, just kind of let them know like, hey, I'm a little off. I had a rough day. I had a rough shift. I had a rough call. And kind of get their buy-in. You're kind of like setting the precedent. So as you kind of go through these emotional like swings and ups and downs, which are going to happen, like that's normal, folks. Like it's expected. And bless my wife, I would say first responder wives or spouses more specifically, man, they are some of the best people in this world. We also have high divorce rates, but they're the ones that if we can communicate, trust me, they want to help you. They love you. They care for you. And when they see someone hurting, I get calls all the time from spouses or messages all the time, that, hey, my spouse is hurting. I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to talk to them. I don't know how to show up or be there for them. And so just by like, I can come home and say, hey, babe, like I'm off. I don't know what's going on, or, maybe I do. And she already kind of knows, and she gives me some of that grace and be like, hey, maybe you just need some of your own time. I'll kind of handle the kids, or I'll cook dinner tonight. And, what can I do to help you out? Like, hey, let's go, and she'll grab me like, hey, let's go sit in the hot tub and check in with each other and things like that. And luckily she is in the medical field, and I don't, gore her out when I was flying and doing things like that, but she gets it. Like, she understands some of that. And she used to be in organ recovery back when she was going through perfusion school for the donor team. And she got to see some of those things. And so she also has her own kind of trauma from that. And so, it is something that being able to communicate and build these support systems, whether it be internally with your peers, whether it be with good leadership, or whether just like you said, thinking of your family as part of my team. Like, I look at everybody as part of my team, because sometimes I need this team and sometimes I need that team. But I at least ask and say, hey, I need help, or hey, I'm having a bad day. It's rough. And that's kind of where I'm kind of leading to with kind of some thoughts about, like, maybe we should be doing like emotional check-ins, at shift change and things like that. Like, hey, how y'all feeling today? Like, normalize these conversations so people can actually go like, hey, I'm actually not doing so well. Like, I got a lot of life stress going on, or maybe my kid got hurt, or I'm worried about, I just got a fender bender, so we can really like openly talk about how we emotionally feel, so our teammates, our partners, our peers can help us through that shift. Maybe, hey, okay, cool, well, maybe we're going to kind of give you a little bit more downtime today, or not throw you so many hard patients, or whatever that like look like. But more importantly, just opening the conversation. Like, the water cooler conversations need to happen, and need to happen more frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
So what about burnout? We talked a little bit about that, and we know that, hey, like I said, it's a slow walk to sad music. Like, if we don't take care of some of these things, if we're not building in good stress management techniques, if we don't have a good support system, all of these are going to lead to burnout. And some of the people have heard my story on burnout, but what are your thoughts on, have you personally experienced it? If you did, like, what did that feel like? So we can hopefully normalize this and let other people know, like, hey, this is what burnout feels like. Because sometimes they just may not even realize like that they are burned out, because they just don't have that awareness or that emotional intelligence yet.
Yeah, I think there's two types of burnout. I think it can be fairly acute and it can be kind of chronic as well. And I think the chronic burnout's kind of that slow progression that is almost subconscious. You don't even realize that you're there. And I think I've been in both phases, right? I think acute burnout happens when you just have a bunch of shifts in a row that really suck for one reason or another. You're running really hard calls, you're not nailing the skills that you've trained for. Um, you're just really busy, you're getting off late. Maybe that happens 3 or 4 shifts in a row, and you feel acutely burned out, like you need some time off, you need some time away from the job. And that's a really easy recovery. You can have a weekend off where you get outside, enjoy the nice weather, you exercise, you eat well, you spend time with your family, and next week you're ready to jump back into the job. But I think the chronic burnout is a little bit harder to solve. And I've been in that point too, where, you have several months or even a year where you're not being intentional about putting yourself first. You're not eating the way you're supposed to. You're letting exercise go, and you're not handling the calls the way you should. And that requires a lot more difficult solution and a lot more time, I think, to heal from, and a lot more intentionality to heal from. I've been there before, especially when I was, deep into getting prereqs done for PA school. And so I was attending classes every week, and I was working my regular shift and then overtime shifts, and, burning the candle at both ends. And I just let myself go. I wasn't putting myself first at all. I wasn't paying attention to my health. And that's a hard place to be. And it requires a lot of intentionality and commitment to change to get past. But you have to in order to serve your patients the right way. But it's a hard place to get to, and it's a hard place to get out from as well. Um, one concept that I like surrounding burnout is, I think the more you can put the locus of control on yourself and the things that you control, the more likely you are to overcome burnout. When you look at the system that you work in, or the hospital system that you work for, or the call volume that you have, or the patient load that you have to deal with every day, and you look at all these factors that are totally outside of your control, you're going to be overwhelmed and you're going to be burned out if you're focused on everything that you have zero control over. And so one thing I tell people is, you've got to look at the things that you actually can control. And when you focus your mind on the things you can control, you actually realize there's a lot that you have control over. And a lot of it's the things we talked about: getting up early and putting yourself first. Everybody can get up early. Everybody can hydrate. Everybody can pay attention to what they're putting in their mouth. Everybody can do some form of exercise, even if it's just walking outside for a half hour. Everybody can do those things, and they're within your control. I can't control the system. I can't control the patients that are coming into the ER. When I was a paramedic, I can't control how many calls the dispatcher is going to give me, or if they're going to give me a late call. I can't control any of that stuff. But you can control how you show up every single day, and how you show up for your patients, how you show up for your family. But it requires a level of intentionality I don't think a lot of people are willing to commit to. But man, it's key in our field. You have to be so intentional in emergency medicine, or it's going to kill you. It's too stressful of a job. You deal with too much unpredictability, too much chaos, that if you do not have the ability to develop commitment and discipline and consistency, eventually this job is going to kill you in some way or another. Maybe it's just going to deteriorate your health. Maybe you're going to form bad coping strategies that end up taking your life. But if you're not intentional, this job is going to take your life from you. So that, I think that's just a key to burnout, is looking at the things you can control. Stop focusing on the things that you can't. Stop complaining about where you work. Stop complaining about the hospital. And yes, a lot of these things need to change. And I'm not saying don't be vocal about the big things that need to change. I'm just saying focus your time and energy on yourself, and, speak up if there's changes that are going to happen. You need to talk to leadership. I'm not saying don't advocate for that stuff, but on a daily basis, you've got to focus on yourself and not all the stuff that you can't control. And I think that's huge. When I refocused my mindset on me and stopped focused on all the stuff that I can't control, it was a huge switch that flipped for me.
I like how you kind of put that too, Aaron, like, focused on me, because when you do focus on you, and you utilize these tools, you do figure out like what you do and do not have control over. And there's days like where I struggle with that still, like just understanding myself in recovery. And so, I do have to ask that very question of like, is this something that I can control or is it not? And if it's not, then that is my cue that I mentally need to let that shit roll off my shoulders and down my back and off. So that way it doesn't stick with me, because I can dwell on it all I want. It ain't going to change anything. But what I can control is how I show up. What I can control is waking up every morning and getting after my mental health routine and my physical fitness routine. I can control what time I go to sleep at night, for the most part. You got kids, life, I get that. But there are things that we can control. We just need to do it. And some people just don't have those skills. And so I would encourage you, just start small, start with one habit. Like, hey, every night I'm going to go to bed at 10 o'clock. Dr. Salim Razai over at Razai Strong, he just did a list on, hey, here are the 4 things you should do, at night to get a good restful sleep. Shutting off your screens 2 hours before, don't eat food, 2 hours before bed, shut down the bright lights. Like, these are little things that you guys can do, and just commit to that, and then next thing, pick up one more thing and add that to your list. And guess what? Before you know it, you're actually habit stacking at that point, folks. But burnout is real. Like that. Yep. That's what almost killed me the second time. It was very insidious. When you look at the prevalent concerns among emergency medical professionals, EMD docs, things like that, the research indicates we have a high level and high rates of emotional exhaustion. These people feel unempathetic. They feel like I should be feeling, it commonly comes across to me as I feel emotionally numb, and I'm like, okay, well, are you not burned out? Maybe like, have you not put your point, like burned your gas, burned your midnight oil to the point where, just like any other, engine, our body is an engine. And if we have our engine consistently pegged at redline, it's only a matter of time before it blows. And even if I let off the gas just a little bit, right, like it's just going to wear out faster. And that's that chronic burnout. Like, it just takes longer to get to that point. Like, you're giving yourself little breaks, so it's not going to just blow out all of a sudden. It's like an acute burnout. But once again, it is going to come back and haunt you. And we want these people to have good, fulfilled lives. Like, it's not normal to feel emotionally numb, folks. It's just not, and I felt the same way. And so I had to really work on myself, find those tools, get a therapist, and make sure I was seeing her. I did ketamine therapy. I got a support dog. Like, I changed my own unhealthy habits, because guess what? That is what I can control. And so I had to look at myself and do some really good, like, write down some stuff and go, Chris, like, look, you're killing yourself, brother. Like, if you don't take care of you, and more importantly, like, if I'm not around, the first thought that comes to my mind is my beautiful wife and what she's going to have to do to support 2 kids. Like, and then I have my kids that are going to grow up like not really knowing their dad because they're kind of still young, and And those things actually kind of push me into like making sure I show up. So when I get the lazy moments or the thoughts in my head, like, I'm fine. And honestly, I mean, there are times that I shift. Like there's times where I just need to be grinding like I was with the nonprofit and trying to stand this up. And I didn't take care of myself. I prioritized some other things. And then once again, I got right back into it. And so this last month has really been all about focusing on me because I have that time and the capability and the space now that the Mind the Frontline nonprofit's up and going, that once again, I made myself a priority. I made my family the second priority. And then work is now third or fourth. Like I got a ton of emails, folks, like, and that used to crush my anxiety. And now I'm just like, yeah, but I took care of myself first. I'm going to go take care of my family after this by picking up my son. And, and then if I get to my emails, great. But that's nothing that it'll be there tomorrow. And guess what? When I die, I'll probably still have an inbox that's full, folks. So at the end of the day, like I'm not going to get ahead of that. What I can control is how do I meet, that finish line? And I want to make sure I meet it as a good dad, as a good friend, as a good coworker, as a better husband. And those things need to start having priority. Take away the material shit. Sorry, I'm just going to say it, but take away that stuff and really think about like what does fill your cup. And I can tell you, it's not, working overtime for a new car or being able to, it's the little things that do matter and they keep showing up every day. And what better way to give back to your family that loves you than to show up and take care of yourself?
100%. Yeah, that's great.
Well, what about meaning, finding meaning and purpose? Because I know if I'm feeling burned out, more than likely I probably need to be looking for some sort of meaning or purpose to what I'm doing, and hopefully that can re-spark or reinvigorate me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, meaning in this job is you've got to realize what your why is. Why are you doing this? Why did you get into emergency medicine? I think somebody had a quote recently I heard that if you have a strong enough why, you can overcome pretty much anything. And I think that's so true because if you're having a rough day, but you remember like, hey, I got into this to serve patients, to heal people, which is what I think my purpose is to heal people and to serve people, and not just patients, but my coworkers as well, and everybody in emergency medicine. One of my goals is to help heal the healers, especially in a post-COVID world where everyone's really hurting. And so that's my why is I'm here to serve, I'm here to heal people. And that can really help you deal with a really shitty day if you're keeping that in mind. So that's what I go back to. I think if you have a clear meaning as to why you're doing what you're doing, it's going to make you be able to survive anything. And I think if you're in this field for the wrong reason, if you're in this field to make money, a lot of doctors are in this field just because they knew that becoming a doctor would lead to a high income. They have super high burnout rates too because they get through their residency and they realize what this is for, and they realize that a high income's not enough to sustain you. And I think that's a thing at all levels, right? I mean, you can't just be here for the money. And a lot of people aren't, but the people that are discover in a hurry that that's not enough of a motivation to be here. It's not just any other job where you're just here to collect a paycheck. You actually need to be connecting with patients and serving patients in order to do this long term, or it's going to burn you out because you're not here for the right reasons.
When you mentioned that, maybe it is being more caring and empathetic with your patient or your plan of care, your treatment in the back of the ambulance, or the perpetrator that you just booked or arrested. Like those actually kind of bring the meaning and purpose to why you do what you do. And I know, at least for me, when I was struggling from burnout, like I definitely lost that why. I didn't have a passion to teach anymore. I didn't want to practice critical care medicine anymore. I didn't want to get on the helicopter. And it has taken me almost, like I said, 2 years, and I'm just now back in the UR, kind of working, as a sedation medic and doing kind of first assist stuff. And I'm going back to the fire department to help a local fire department, stand up a mobile intensive care unit. Like I found my purpose. It came back, but I lost it. And I guess what I want to share with people is like, that's okay. It's okay to lose your way sometimes. Like that I would expect, especially as you have a long career in emergency medicine or, in public safety. But there is the ability to, for those who feel like, hey, I've lost it, I'm never going to get it back. by practicing some of the things that Aaron mentioned above, like you can absolutely bring it back and get it back on track. And sometimes it doesn't come overnight. It's not a switch. Like I have to be very thoughtful and mindful about how I'm getting back into medicine. And that's kind of why I try to go a different route this time. It's like, hey, I'm gonna do something ER where it's not so critical, and it's a little bit more of like an elective surgery and things like that. And it's a different type of medicine, so it's stimulating my brain. So like it's like finding a new hobby, right? Like I love medicine. I just found a new hobby within medicine, and I'm kind of fulfilled with it right now. Like I'm really kind of drawn to it. I don't like wearing the lead 24 hours or 12 hours a day. Like that is definitely taking a toll on my back, but I have found my meaning and my purpose. And when you have meaning and purpose in a demanding work of emergency medicine, it can buffer against all those negative effects of stress and burnout. And, it allows you to connect with your core values, which is why did I get into this in the first place? Helping others to make a difference. And that enhances your job satisfaction, right? And then that enhances your overall psychological well-being. And that cultivates a sense of meaning, feeling like I am involved and making a meaningful impact on the world. Because I can tell you, like a good book to read is called The Power of Meaning. It's a very strong book, and I highly recommend it to anybody. But a lot of things that they've shown is the people that didn't have a purpose or a meaning, they got a lot of short-term fulfillment, which we can get from alcohol or just that adrenaline dump. But what they found is the people that actually had purpose and meaning, having a kid, being of service of others, those individuals long term, okay, once again, strategic, had really good outcomes. They had lower, cardiovascular rates and, disease rates and things like that. So low stroke, dementia, like they looked at a lot of things. So it was a lot of good research that came out of that book, but it gave you the tools too. And it was really enlightening to read to me, but I can absolutely say, like, if you've lost your way, more importantly, if you feel lost right now, that's normal. Okay. I've been there. There's other people out there that could probably relate. You can get yourself back on track. You just need to work at it, and you actually need to make a difference and make a change in what you are doing. And by finding that purpose and maintaining it by being of service of others. And that's what I do through work now. That's what I do through the nonprofit. It's not about Chris anymore. I've been able to kind of shed off some of those emotional character defects, I always call them, and really kind of just do purposeful, meaningful work and help others, that might be struggling or might need to find their way, or at least, hey, I'm going to hold the door open for you. It might be just taking the groceries out for grandma, because I've seen some of the old ladies here in Salt Lake and it's snowing. And, sometimes when it snows, I usually will typically, because I have older residents that live around my home and I don't want them to fall and break a hip because I like them. And I know what the statistics are if they do. So I go over there and just snow blow their freaking driveway for them. That to me provides me. So it doesn't always have to be at work. You can find that outside of work as well.
Yeah. I think it's so key to be looking beyond yourself. In order to see your elderly neighbors and that they need help, you have to be looking outside yourself. And so many people can't see past their own nose because they're so stuck in their own stuff. And I think that's huge to be. I mean, you're in a good mental state when you're able to look beyond yourself. And see what other people are struggling with. And even just seeing that your neighbor needs help. Most people can't see that. They're so focused on their own problems. I think that's a great point.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Today's show has definitely been super enlightening. Do you have any final thoughts, or how can our listeners and viewers find you after the show? You mentioned the podcast, Practical EMS. You want to do a quick plug on how they can kind of find that episode or find more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you search PracticalEMS under So if you search PracticalEMS under any podcast platform, it should pop up. I also have a clip channel on YouTube. I put the full episodes on YouTube as well, but I put a lot of the highlights and the clips under YouTube under PracticalEMS as well. I put out episodes every week, usually with a collection of EMTs, paramedics, nurses, and docs, where we just talk about stories in emergency medicine and try to learn from them, try to grow from them, and make people not feel so alone with their stories, regardless of where you work in emergency medicine, whether it's field or in the hospital. We've got some great information for you. The website's practicalems.com. You can join my email list there. If you want to financially support the show, there's an EKG course on there if you need help with EKGs. Otherwise, it's all free stuff, so it really helps me a ton if you can subscribe. Obviously, these shows cost money to produce and time to produce, so just subscribing to the show is a huge help and motivates me to keep doing this. I'm on all social media platforms under Practical EMS to find all the clips and highlights and stuff like that as well.
Well, you heard it, folks. Try to go over, support his show. And Aaron, we would be more than happy to make a plug on our website and put you down as a partner. So hopefully we can drive some
Awesome.
traffic to you and list you under one of our members. We have a member section only, but we kind of like to highlight good podcasts that I feel like bring value to people. And once again, allow them to see past their nose. So I love that, what you're doing and the work that you're doing out there, because once again, I think having these more and more of these conversations is absolutely what's needed. And letting people know, like, hey, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel the feelings that you are feeling. And if you have any questions about whether this is normal or not normal, hopefully you're kind of getting some of those answers through these podcasts. And if not, you can always go over to mindthefrontline.org and check out and see some of the resources. But absolutely go check out PracticalEMS and support the show. We want to make sure that we can continue to have good podcast episodes that Aaron puts out that do benefit our community. And the one way to do that is either, support them either through a donation or, if you need help with an EKG course, go check them out. As we approach the end of another enlightening episode of Critical Conversations by Mind the Frontline, we absolutely would like to express our sincere gratitude for Aaron, his time and his energy to come on the Critical Conversations show, and his valuable insights on how to thrive in emergency medicine and just some of his experiences and his story on how he got here. His knowledge elevates our first responder mission of promoting mental health, wellness, and recovery amongst first responders. Let's continue to have these critical conversations together. Thank you for being part of this episode of Critical Conversations by Mind the Frontline. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and mind the frontline. To our dedicated listeners, thank you again for joining us on this critical journey. Remember, the Critical Conversations podcast is a steadfast resource for police, fire, EMS, allied healthcare workers, dispatchers, air medical, and military personnel, along with their families. Your support makes the impact of these conversations resonate even further. If you found today's discussion enlightening and want to stay connected with our ongoing mission, please be sure to subscribe to the Critical Conversations podcast. You can find us via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and the Mind the Frontline website. Your subscription ensures that you will never miss an episode, and it's a powerful way to show your commitment to fostering resilience within the entire first responder community. For more information and additional resources, visit our website at www.mindthefrontline.org. Together, let's continue these critical conversations and build a stronger, more resilient first responder family. We thank you for being a part of the Critical Conversations podcast. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and mind the front line.